The first person to have a talk today is Ihor Vehesh, and he is speaking about proactive tolerance as a component of political education, a Ukrainian perspective. Ihor, you're very welcome to talk to us.
So I would like to start my today's brief speech from one little observation, and it is concerned with one simple thing. If you open any textbook, I mean the general textbook in political science, probably you won't find there any topic on tolerance or even on political tolerance. We will also won't find there any mention of tolerance in topics that at first glance could be relevant to tolerance. Such topics as, for example, democracy or political culture. There may be some brief, very little mentions. And it looks like a very important issue, the issue of tolerance, which aims to understand how people communicate, how people make attitudes towards each other, is a sort of a great omission in political science. And I was thinking about the reason, why political science actually is ignoring tolerance in this kind of way, just little brief mentions. And I think that the reason for this is the nature of political science. I think it is rooted in the nature, which is determined by the specific object of what political science researches. Well, each science, to some extent, is the reflection of its own object of research. And for political science, such object is exactly the political reality, the world of politics. And what do we mean by that? Well, actually, the world of conflicts, the world of confrontation. Therefore, it is actually no surprising that the focus on such object, the permanent intention to capture this object, well, this all determines the nature of the science. And this nature is the nature of conflict. Also, it is no surprising that one of the dominant methodological approaches in political science is the theory of conflicts, which was primarily developed in sociology by such scientists like Louis Corser or Ralph Dahrendorf. According to this approach, we can treat conflict not only as such that plays some negative role in the society, but also as something positive. And actually, this view on the nature of conflict is very close to the nature of political science in itself. But we have a problem, actually, because at the same time, we need some paradigm shiftings in political science, especially when we talk about what Francis Fukuyama called a globalized democracy, especially when we talk about the effort to create a global integrated space of cooperation in which peaceful cooperation actually requires a platform. And this platform needs to have a clearly defined values and strict rules, and all the political actors should treat these values commonly. And it doesn't matter who do we understand by political actors. Do we mean the state or social individuals? And while taking into account this, it should be noted that tolerance in general and also the proactive tolerance in particular are exactly those theoretical constructions that help to provide this platform, that help to this platform to operate. And in this case, political science should make a great step towards tolerance. First of all, it needs this concept on one hand to improve its own conflict nature, to make it this nature a more tolerant nature, in my opinion. And on the other hand, it has to use its own resources and its own knowledge to disseminate these concepts as integral components of the political education. And in this regard, there is a logical question: what structural elements in political science and in political education meet actually with the idea of proactive tolerance? In my opinion, there are a couple of such parts of political science. And first of all, it's democracy, or what we may call a theory of democracy. And the second big chapter is the concept of civic society, or I would say a concept of civic culture. These two are the most important. But when we also talk about the situation in Ukraine, I would also like to add two more additional options, which are very important, first of all, for Ukraine. It's the option of state building, the concept of state building, and later I will explain what I mean by this definition. And another very important aspect, which is also to some extent an object of political science, that's the issue of national security. So now I will try to outline my vision of the concept of proactive tolerance within political education while analyzing the relationship of tolerance with these components of political science and political education. So first of all, the democracy. Well, you all know that democracy in its historical development has undergone considerable evolution from the direct democracy of ancient Greece, which in the practical aspect wasn't democracy for everybody, to the modern forms of representative democracy, which provide the greater involvement of the society in the construction of public authorities and local government. Well, in general, the theory of democracy can be explained also as a gradual rethinking of the principles on which the mechanism of governance works. Well, in classical theories, what we mean by democracy is the power of majority. And that's the most simple and understandable principle of democracy. But if we move to our time, we will see that modern theories of democracy actually pay more attention to the protection of the minorities. And this exact idea, in my opinion, finds a direct response in the concept of tolerance. And well, why? Because it encourages the differences. And in this case, it is not difficult to build a bridge between democracy and tolerance, and to build a bridge between tolerance and political science. Well, but at the same time, I also would mention that there are some negative aspects when we talk about democracy. Sometimes, there are moments that can weaken the principles of democracy. And in the worst case, it can even bring us to authoritarianism. Well, I will just name one example. For example, freedom of speech, which is one of the cornerstones of democracy, provides equal opportunities for those political forces that work on the basis of professionalism, responsibility, and realism. And at the same time, it gives the same possibilities for the forces that promote outright populism. And well, because populist slogans and programs, they are more receptive to the general public than realistic problems of professionals. This leads to a disappointing tendency. In a number of democratic societies, the populists just begin to take power. The question is, why is it happening? Well, as Friedrich Hayek once noted, it is always easier to unite people around some negative program. You just have to show them the enemy, and you will unite them around the idea of overcoming this enemy. And if you cannot find the enemy, well, you have to create the enemy. It's very simple. And in addition, these slogans and programs of the populists, they are very simple and they are very loud. And it, of course, determines their popularity. They are created on the same principle as the advertising in the consumer society. The improvement of your life right now, immediately, without much effort. Everything will change in your life for the better if you will just buy this product, or you will vote for this political party or for this political leader, and nothing else is needed from you. And it's a holiday of collective irresponsibility. And then comes next thing. After voting for political force that is openly a populist force, society gains it gains an incompetent power. And later, the crisis comes in all the spheres of governance. Some crises that we, for example, can mention after the coming of, in my opinion, a populist power of the modern president in Ukraine. And this in turn leads to social tensions, to numerous conflicts, which again exacerbate the populist tendencies. So the question is, what do we have to do? in such conditions. I mean, can we destroy the mechanisms that allow populists to come to power? Well, it means that can we eliminate the freedom of speech? Of course not, because that would actually kill the idea of democracy in itself. It's not impossible. We cannot eliminate the democratic mechanisms of coming to political power of everybody, but what we can do, we can, in my opinion, we can weaken the tendencies of populism. We can weaken the possibilities for populists to come to power. And in my opinion, for that, we need actually the political education. This requires the spread of political education, which would include, and it has to include, the principles of proactive tolerance. Because in my opinion, if we take a look at the program, I will use this definition, a program of proactive tolerance is a positive program. And of course, it is more difficult to unite people around this program, but you have to convince them, you have to propagate this idea. And this positive program would be a good alternative to the negative program of confrontation, which is promoted by the populists. And of course, it will strengthen the democracy in itself. So here is one of the biggest links between democracy, the idea of proactive tolerance, political education, and political science. That is about democracy. The second thing, in my opinion, which is also very important and in which the idea of proactive tolerance should be incorporated, is the idea of civic culture. Well, strengthening of democracy, it makes us to understand the importance of this another component of political education. Well, if we use, for example, the typology which was proposed by Gabriel Almond and Sidney Verba, I think we must concentrate on constructing a civic culture as one of as a culture that corresponds to the key principles of democracy and civil society. Well, briefly, civic culture implies the high level of political consciousness, awareness of political life, and it's about the principles of cooperation. And that is also another very important link, because proactive tolerance is also about cooperation. We do not talk here about elementary patience to another one. We talk that we have to accept that another one, and we have to cooperate with him or her. In my opinion, civic culture, a proper civic culture, is impossible without including into it such component as tolerance. And it's the second important component of political education after the concept of democracy. We should understand that civic culture is, first of all, the culture of civic participation. And consequently, it is the culture of interaction between citizens. So a logical question again arises: how to create this kind of interaction so that it preserves opportunities for those groups which we call the minorities. That is one of the biggest questions, actually. And I think that here again we need the concept of proactive tolerance, because it actually offers such way. It helps us to understand that the communication between different social groups in the society, including the dominating groups, including the minorities, should be based on the platform of equality. And that is a very important thing about proactive tolerance. And that's why actually we need it. Political education, in my opinion, cannot be considered as an effective one without the inclusion of proactive tolerance in the structure of the political consciousness of the citizens of, in my opinion, any democratic society. So this is the second very important chapter. And I would like also to pay attention to two additional moments or aspects of political science which also need an involvement of proactive tolerance, because they are very important, especially for Ukraine. Well, not only for Ukraine, but in my opinion, first of all, for the Ukraine. First thing is the concept of state building. Well, how to build a state which would be appropriate for everybody, how to build a state that would survive actually in front of so many threats in the modern world. And I think the one of the most important issues of state building is the idea of how we choose our course of development. That is the problem. I mean, economical course, political, cultural. To have this choice, actually, the choice of the course of development is the ability of free societies. I mean, those societies that once Karl Popper called as open societies. And this choice actually is not an easy task in the societies that consist of a large number of communities that differ culturally and they have different levels of values and so on. It is also a matter of a great complexity for the post-colonial society, as well as for transformational societies. And well, I mean the societies which try to make a transition into democracy. And of course, all these obstacles are significant threats to the quality of state building in such societies. And unfortunately, Ukraine is one of such societies. It is post-colonial, it is transformational, and it also consists of many communities. And we have to create a platform for Ukraine, a platform of political education that will actually unite these all problems and will provide a single solution, which, in my opinion, is exactly the solution in the discourse of proactive tolerance. Well, I think that Ukraine, the intention of Ukraine to integrate into the system of Western values was proclaimed quite convincingly. But there is also a problem. It's not enough just to proclaim, because these values very often in our societies they are perceived as being a part of the civic culture without much effort, without uh, painstaking daily work to incorporate them into the structure of our post-colonial political consciousness. We have the pressure of our totalitarian past. That is right. We have a totalitarian past. And this totalitarian past is, unfortunately, it is not dead. It still lives in our consciousness and it produces a specific worldview according to which any progressive changes in our society depend only on the will and intentions of the political elite, of the ruling somebody. At the same time, we have a leveling of social individuals as actors, active actors of choice, values, of meanings, and so on. We have a permanent attitude to power as the only mechanism of social transformation. And it brings, again, a passive individual, a passive social individual who can only wait. And this brings us another thing that no reforms actually can be successful and can bring us closer to the Western values if we do not realize that we need collective efforts. Without the accumulation of a broad public resource, this system of values would just be ineffective. We need active society. We need active society that would be united by the values of democracy, tolerance, the values of progress. And for that, we need a normal platform of communication. We need the establishment of this communication. And primarily, I mean here the communication between dominant communities and the minorities, between pro-government and oppositional discourses. And well, this communication in democratic society is possible only on the basis of respect to the other. And this is actually the issue of proactive tolerance. But at the same time, when we talk about state building in Ukraine, in my opinion, it's not only the question of Ukraine, but I think it's also the question of responsibility of a globalized democracy. And in this context, I can agree with the words of German researcher Justenhofen, who wrote that political and military struggle in Ukraine and through Ukraine is both the struggle of social and political orientation of this post-Soviet society, as well as the geostrategic struggle between Russia and the West. And these two struggles, they are interconnected and they stimulate each other. So I think that Ukrainian state building is very important, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe, actually, for democracy, for democratical approach to build tolerant attitude of the states in the international sphere. And the last thing, maybe I have 2 minutes, I guess. I'm going to make it. The last moment in political science, the last aspect that I would like to mention concerning the idea of proactive tolerance is the issue of national security. Well, I have to explain that the discourse of tolerance in Ukrainian political science at the present stage requires very careful theoretical construction that would reflect all the specifics and all the factors of the current situation. And undoubtedly that it is the situation of war. And one of such factors is the military conflict with the Russian Federation. The war in Donbass is the key argument of those Ukrainian intellectuals who are critical of the idea of tolerance. And we actually discussed these problems during our previous conferences. Many were speaking about this, that in their opinion, the idea of tolerance is to some extent a weakening factor, a weakening idea in the confrontation against an aggressive neighbor, for example, against Russia. Why is that so? Well, they think that there is a logic of war, and the logic of war dictates its own discourses. And in these discourses, the non-violent means of communication are usually treated as manifestations of weakness. Well, the state of war, it includes all your attention, and it needs the constant involvement in its meaning. And of course, this normal actually opposition, I and another one, when we talk about the situation of war, brings into totally different formats, friends and enemies. That is the problem. And in this case, under these conditions, violence, of course, comes to the fore among all means of communication. Violence actually is the real communication of war. And for those Ukrainian intellectuals, the idea of tolerance is something that is probably inappropriate when you talk about the war. But I think that such vision does not stand up to criticism when it is opposed to tolerance as a force. And that is also a very important idea which is included in the concept of proactive tolerance, the idea of tolerance as a force. Yes, a soft, but a force. And in my opinion, I would say that proactive tolerance is an active defense structure, or a structure of an active defense. It is very important. Well, it aims at preventing destructive tendencies in the society, tendencies of social division, tendencies of disintegration. And such a model is rather an effective soft force which tries to overcome the contradictions that exist in the middle of the society. And of course, it strengthens the society. And in this case, we can say that tolerance is not only an important tool in state building, but also an integral part of effective development of institutions of democracy and the civil society. When we begin to strengthen the society, to strengthen the socio-political space of the Ukrainian society, we try to reduce the social and political tensions. We try to strengthen the values of democracy. We try to build a proper way of communication between different social groups which exist in Ukraine. And the main idea is that proactive tolerance brings the progressive ideas, the progressive practices of interaction between the others. And it stimulates actually a constant sense of unity, probably a solidarity among these people. And this solidarity is based on the respect of the differences. And such unity, in my opinion, can be a powerful force in resisting the aggressive actions. So in this case, and this is the last one, I'm sorry for taking so much time. In this case, tolerance can be treated not only as the question of national security. It can be treated not only as the factor of national security, but also as one of the very important instruments of national security. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.